Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the OK Grognard Show. It is Saturday, June 27th, 2020, 5:30 p.m. Central in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. We are continuing with our DM reviews of Ray Harryhausen films. This is our sixth one, isn't it? And we're looking at Jason and the Argonauts. This might actually be my favorite. I think it's one of the best of the Harryhausen films, not just because of Harryhausen's work, which is tremendous in this. There are a couple of particularly difficult things that he managed in here that we'll talk about as we go, but also because the story is one of the best. I don't want to get down on the writers of the other works that he was associated with, but a lot of them were a little thin on the scripts, perhaps a little cliche. Dialogue was difficult, but you know, he's working here with a classic legend, Jason and the Argonauts. I know it diverges on a few points. They hit all the major spots and managed to tell a tight tale in about an hour and 40 minutes. It stays moving, unlike with some of the other films where you'd get in between action scenes and you'd kind of wonder when they're getting to the next one. There's enough exposition and story in this to keep you paying attention, and it feels satisfying as it goes. It ends a little bit abruptly, but it also ends with the tease of a potential cliffhanger, which is always had me wondering if they had intended to maybe do some additional Jason and the Argonaut voyages. I don't know if they had planned, if they just left the door open for themselves and then never followed through, or if they had intended to actually do some things but couldn't find studio help. Maybe they went with, because after Jason and the Argonauts, then they get that Hammer film, 1,000,000 Years BC. Then they get Valley of GWANGI, and I think both of those being dinosaur flicks. I don't know. It wasn't until 73, and this one's from 63. And then you got 66 with 1,000,000 Years, and 69 Valley of GWANGI. It wasn't until 73 you get back to Golden Voyage of SINBAD. So, there's 10 years between sword and sandal flicks. Seventh Voyage of SINBAD was 58. So it's only 5 years until Jason the Argonaut. Or rather, 5 years till Jason the Argonauts. And with that film, and I don't know, you'd probably have to find a way to check the box office. Maybe there's some money issues there that they just didn't feel like that was really doing the trick. But boy, it's really, I think, one of the best films. It certainly stacks up there, I think, personally, better than Clash of the Titans. The two subsequent SINBAD films, Golden Voyage of SINBAD in 73, Eye of the Tiger 77, are both pretty darn good. From the standpoint of story, they're a lot more robust than Seventh Voyage was, I think. A lot more going on, a lot less milking of moments. Right? So we'll see. Let's have a look at some of what we got with Jason and the Argonauts, and we'll decide from there. Jason and the Argonauts. So here was the title screen. They did again a nice job with the fonts and the graphics in the opening sequences. They've got Ray Harryhausen, not just creator of special visual effects, but also with an associate producer title above his name, so he's getting a little more credit overall for what's going on with the films. And as we begin, Peleus is checking with an oracle, a priest, to try to figure out what he should do. He's going to war against Jason's kingdom, and Jason isn't even, Jason's barely a babe at this point. This is 20 years before we'll actually get to see Jason in action. And the prophecy is basically Zeus says, you're going to win the kingdom. But years from now, his son is going to get it from you. And Peleus decides on his own, well, how many kids does that king have? 3, 2 daughters and a son. Well, I'll just kill the 3 of them, and then I'm not going to have to give up the kingdom to one of his offspring. And he really embraces this philosophy a little more than one would expect, because once they go in and take the kingdom, he wanders into a temple where the 2 daughters are, the one a babe set in the arms of a statue of Hera, the other pleading with Hera for some sort of assistance. He goes up, he kills the older daughter, the younger one, who I'll just tell you right now, we really don't hear about ever again, is still a baby and up in the arms of the goddess, a priestess. See if I can get the air quotes in here. Priestess, who we know as Hera, of course, comes out of the shadows and says, hey, Zeus says you get a kingdom, you're going to give up the kingdom. That's all the prophecy really said. This crap with you killing his kids, killing the former king's kids, that's on you. Oh, no, Zeus said I should. No, he didn't. So there's a little back and forth. She makes sure that he understands this ain't the way it happens. Oh, and by the way, here's some of the prophecy you don't know. There's going to be a one-sandaled man 20 years from now, and he's going to kill you. He's like, well, okay, I'll keep my eyes peeled. Thanks a lot. He gets out of there. Zeus is a little miffed because Peleus is taking things under his own advisement and not just following Zeus. So he actually starting to come around to Jason, because Jason, after all, is part of Zeus's prophecy and is going to take the kingdom. So we've got this wonderful Mount Olympus. We've had these big battle sequences in a city. We've had this open beach scene with the camp below. We've had some great locations here. From a DMing perspective, these are all super picturesque. They're epic. They're the kind of things you want to be able to describe to players, and you want to be able to describe them well if you want to give them a feeling of how big the story is. He and Hera have a little exchange. She says she wants to help Jason. He says no. He has to do this sort of thing. He's my guy. He's not your guy. She says, well, I want to help him. Well, how many times did his sister call out to you by name? She says 5. He says, well, you can help him 5 times. And that all happens during the story. Some of it's actually super important. Some of it's a little less so, and it's more games of the gods, which I think it's important to think of Greek mythology here in terms of how it plays out, not so much in most movies, but in the written literature, um, formally spoken word, obviously, but at some point written down and what's handed down to us. They're all very much infighting constantly. They're all big on deception, tricking people into believing one thing when they're actually doing another. Um, if there was ever a good place to point to when they talk about early RPG, early D&D wishes being corrupted by DMs, this is it. The gods of the Greek gods, the gods of Olympus, will constantly give you bits and pieces of information, uh, seemingly in hopes that you will misinterpret this stuff. The oracles, it's always a riddle, it's always some sort of deceptive information such that it's going to confuse and lead you to believe one thing and then screw yourself over. So anytime you want to do a traditional old school RPG granting of a wish, look back toward Greek mythology to figure out how to do it in such a way that it's going to create additional story, not just put a cap on one, right? You're not trying to end anything when you twist these things. You're trying to create more conflict and give more opportunities for heroes to overcome things. Ultimately, that's what the Greek gods seemingly would do. They like to see heroics. They like to put up obstacles. They like to create conflict just to see what cream rises to the top. So think of it that way when you're dealing with wishes in an RPG, and you probably won't go too far afield from old school sensibilities. Well, it is 20 years later, as we said, when Hera spooks Peleus's horse. He falls into some water. She gets into the water herself and drags him down such that he almost drowns. And this is all when Jason happens to be nearby. He goes in, he pulls him out of the water, and loses a sandal in the process of it. Peleus catches on to this, thanks him for saving him, takes him back to his camp, doesn't tell him who he is. He asks Jason who he is, and Jason, of course, says, well, I'm Jason, and my father was the king of this kingdom, and this guy Peleus took it over, and I'm going to go kill him. And Peleus is like, well, I'll tell you what you should really do. He says, you should go after this golden fleece thing on the far side of the world, because that's a thing. If you get that and then you come back and bring that back, then you'll prove to your kingdom, just what you want, which is that you're a real leader, and so on and so forth. So Jason gets caught up in this idea that he has to go on this long adventure because Peleus has been told, if he dies, if you kill him, you'll be destroying yourself. And Hera has said so, and he believes it. But he figures, you know what, I'll just send him on such a long quest to the other side of the world that as long as he's gone, I'll be fine. Well, He explains that to his son, Erastus. Is that his name? Let me make sure. Acastus, that's it. So Peleus' son Acastus is like, Father, what are you doing? Why don't you just kill him? He says, I can't. If I destroy him, I destroy myself. But as long as he's out adventuring, he won't be here trying to kill me himself. So away he goes. Again, this camp is got a wonderful look to it. There's tents all around. There's a lot more to it than what we're showing in there. Jason goes outside of town. There's some ruins there. Formerly a shrine to Hermes, the teacher that's been hanging out, the priest that's been hanging out with Peleus. He's like, well, what do you think? And he says, why don't you ask the gods for help? And he says, Jason says, well, I'm not going to bother them because they're not going to help me anyway. I'm not sure I even believe in the gods. The teacher brings him up onto an altar, up near an altar, and then reveals that he himself is Hermes. And he says, come with me, I'm going to teach you to believe. Transports him up to Olympus, where he then shares Jason with the other gods, who get a real kick out of the fact that Hermes has brought him up there. Zeus and Hera are tickled pink that now Jason is actually a believer and knows that they're both interested in his story. Of course, Jason offends Zeus right away when Zeus asks, well, what do you want? What can I do for you? You want a ship? You want a crew? He says, no, I can get those things myself. He's like, he's turned down a ship and a crew. Everybody else is kind of backing Zeus here because they all know. They got to smile and nod whenever Zeus says anything. He's the big cheese here, right? So he says, I tell you what, I just need heart. I just need the hearts of men. I don't need gold to get a ship. I need to let people know I'm going for this fleece. It's worth more than any kingdom's treasury anywhere, 10 times that. He says, and this is a fight for justice. If I get the hearts of men on my side, I'll have the best crew. He says, I'll have a contest. I'll have a huge games, and essentially he invents the Olympic Games, and believes that the contestants will be competing to be part of his crew. Hey, Ink Dweller, how you doing, buddy? Stopping in the chat there. So he's all for taking care of all this stuff himself. Hera, before Jason leaves, confides in him that she's been allowed by Zeus to interfere, but only a handful of times, so don't call on her too much. And she immediately says, oh, so you want to know two things. You want to know if there's a golden fleece, and where is it? And Zeus says, hey, that's two questions already. She says, well, I'll only give one answer. It's in Kalos at the other end of the world. So there you go. And, yeah, Ink Dweller, that's all right. They're up on YouTube. Seventh Voyage is already up there. We'll get this one up as soon as it's in the can, as it were. So Jason then takes that advice, goes down and gets his Olympic Games cracking. He starts picking the best of the best down here. A couple of people show up late, one of them being Hercules here. And, of course, Jason says, well, don't worry about it, Hercules. You can kick everyone's ass, so quite frankly, we've reserved you a seat. And then this other fella, our buddy Hylas here, shows up and says, hey, they're going to need brains as well as brawn. I know I was late to the party, but I'm hoping I can get a seat. So they have a little discus contest, trying to hit a rock. And Hylas proves himself. You'll see it in the movie when you get the chance. And he also gains a seat. Well, now Jason needs to go get his ship, now that he's got his crew. So he heads down and talks to Argos, who's been building this ship, and he says, for some reason, something within me made me put this figurehead on the stern, watching over the rowers, instead of in the bow. I don't know why. Well, of course, he's being influenced by Hera, and Jason honors him by saying, well, we're going to call this ship the Argo. Hence the name, of course, the Argonauts, the crew then are known as. And now that they've got a ship and they've got a crew, they're going to be heading out. We get a little bit of simple effects with the eyes opening and closing anytime that the figurehead is acting in Hera's interests. So far we really haven't had a whole lot of special effects. And I know I mentioned earlier today when it came to Seventh Voyage that it was refreshing that we got right to some effects early on in the script, unlike with Valley of GWANGI, which admittedly came later, and even 1 million years BC didn't kick off with effects too early either. So too 20 million miles from Earth. And Mysterious Island actually takes a while before we get to any Harryhausen effects as well. But it isn't long, because they get off to sea, and the first place they have to go, because it's a long voyage, they're running out of water on their way. So he talks to Hera. Hera says, hey, go in this direction. You'll be in a place called the Isle of Bronze before you know it. There's fresh water there. You'll be able to get some food, resupply. So they head there. They manage to make it there. Nice shot of the ship here. There's really a lot of nice shots of the ship. And of course, we know that we were going to get to some Harryhausen effects pretty quick here. They're finally at the Isle of Bronze, and they've been told, leave this stuff alone, just get the food and the water. But of course, Hercules is his own man. His buddy Hylas is with him. They become fast friends because of the discus contest they both participated in that got Hylas' place on the boat. And there's a couple of doors in the plinth for this statue. And Hercules is curious, so he goes and pops open these huge doors. No small feat, but he is Hercules. And there's this great treasure room inside. Well, Hercules says, these pearls are gigantic. This is obviously treasure of the gods. But you know what? They're not gonna miss this hairpin. It's gonna make a great. This golden hairpin's gonna make a great spear. So he takes something, even against Jason's advice or warnings to leave other stuff alone, which Hera had told him to convey to everyone. And of course, Talos, the great bronze statue, starts to chase them because, heck, you don't mess with his treasure. He's a guardian of it. They get out onto their ship. They start to go toward getting out of there, but they have to pass through this channel. He walks out on the peninsula here, does the whole Colossus of Rhodes thing, which was the inspiration for this particular creature in Harryhausen's mind. And he disrupts the ship, damages it, throws everybody into the water, cracks off the figurehead. Fortunately, Jason is near enough by to go and ask for some advice. What do you want me to do? She says, well, go for his ankle. He says, you sure you want some help here? It's going to be the second to last time I can help you. He says, yeah. Let's do it. Because remember, 2 questions up in Olympus. Then the help you find an island with water. Now you're asking me this question. This is number 4. I think 5 times was the limit. Oh yeah, okay. So indeed, they all make it to shore. Now Talos is wandering around trying to round them all up now that he's got them trapped on the island. But they distract him long enough for Jason to pull up behind, and there's a little plug in the back of his ankle, and when he unscrews it, pops it open, fluid of life starts to drain out of this giant hollow bronze colossus, and sadly, he begins to die, but not all the men manage to run away fast enough, and Hercules' new buddy gets crushed underneath the falling and destroyed statue. And by the way, great creature. Obviously, you look in the first edition D&D monster manual, and you've got to believe that you definitely got to believe that the Titan in there was fashioned after this particular monster. Is it the Titan? No, not the Titan. Well, I'm confused. We won't spend a lot of time on it. Triton. Right? No. All right. Well, I'm all over the place. It'll come to me a little later and I'll pop it out, right? Titans obviously are big. And they definitely mention that these Titans were here to guard this treasure. And if we go back to Greek mythology, we do know that that the Titans were defeated by the gods of Olympus. They were, after all, the minions of Kronos, who was the father of the Titans, father of Zeus as well. So it's only fair that in this story they get used as guardians, as leftover guardians of godly treasure, Olympus treasure. Anywho, they destroy this wonderful being. And this is, there's an interview on the discs that comes with this particular version of Jason and the Argonauts, if you're ever looking for a good one. This one in particular has a special feature interview with John Landis, who is, of course, totally enamored with Harryhausen and all his work, as he believes most directors and all sorts of artists, of course, are. And he's not wrong. And when they talk about Talos in particular, they talk about the fact that because he's a big metal man, they had to have his movement jerky. It was kind of the opposite of what he was always trying to achieve with the movement of other creatures. They discuss the fact that there was one skeleton in Seventh Voyage, and now he's going to have 7 skeletons to deal with in this one. So there's so much more complex work for Harryhausen to do. And of course the Hydra that's in this has 7 heads. And, you know, there's the idea that he's doing this for hours and hours and hours, working on the micro movements of each head And if he gets called away or has to walk away for a moment, they're in the era before videotape or anything like that, so he has to remember in his head, was this head moving forward? Was this one moving backward when I walked to go to the restroom or whatever? Um, with Talos, rather than those kind of smooth movements, he needed to do these Metal Man kind of jerky movements. Um, and before the sound effects, I think, were added, one of the producers saw some of the footage and said, but it doesn't look very good. And he said, no, it's a big metal guy. Trust me, once everything's in place, this is going to look exactly how I want it to. So they deal with Talos. They manage to repair the ship. They manage to resupply, and they get back underway. He explains we only have one chance left because now Hercules doesn't want to leave the island. When Hylas gets crushed by the falling Talos, nobody actually sees him underneath or sees him die. So they don't know if he's lost on the island somewhere. They just know he's missing. And Hercules, who feels responsible because they'd been buddies since boot camp, since the Olympic Games, he doesn't want to leave. So now they've lost Hylas and they've lost Hercules. In fact, some of the crew are like, well, if Hercules isn't going to keep going, what chance do we have? He was the best among us. And he says, well, okay, I'll tell you what. If the gods believe we should continue, will you continue? So he uses his last favor from Hera to say, what do we do? And she says, well, stay true, stay strong, keep going. By the way, there's an island, and there's a blind man there, and he'll give you more information about how to find the kingdom of Caucasus, where the Golden Fleece is. So go there. This is the last time I can help you. Good luck. So now they don't have any favors from the gods anymore. Or do they? Well, off they go. And they do find this other island, and here's the next bit of effects here. And here we get to see harpies. This is a more fluid creature. I mean, it's almost like a gargoyle in a sense, but they are harpies. This is Greek mythology, and they are torturing the blind Phineas, who, by the way, is being played by second Doctor Who Patrick Troughton. And there's a couple of these creatures. We get to see one pretty fast, and we get to see them torturing Phineas, the blind Phineas, who tries to swing his cane and keep them away, but they always come down. Whenever this table replenishes with food, which it magically does because Phineas is being tortured by the gods, so he'll always get food on this table every day, but whenever he goes to try to eat it, here come the harpies. They drive him away, and then they eat all the food themselves. And this is the punishment under which he lives. Well, Hera has sent them here, knowing full well that he's got information for them, and also knowing that you shouldn't be disrupting one of Zeus's punishments. Nevertheless, if they brave it, maybe Zeus will let them slide. They all arrive. They see the harpies doing this to Phineas. They decide they're going to do something about it. They create a trap. They basically create a giant net trap all around this ruins. And then once the harpies come in, they drop the nets around the sides, and then they go to battle them. They manage to trap them in some netting and capture them. And it's a real treat seeing this conflict here, because as good as the concept of Talos is. It's a bit underwhelming as a battle. This one's pretty good, and we've got more coming up in Jason the Argonauts, and it's one of the reasons it's one of Harryhausen's best films. So, once they've now captured the Harpies, they bring out food for Phineas and say, hey, what do you say? Can you help us out too? We could use some information. He says, well, you know what? In fact, actually, this is the bargain they struck earlier. It says, you got to help me if I'm going to help you. So now he's going to come clean and tell them where the Golden Fleece is, now that he's no longer being punished. The Harpies are in a cage. He can feed them scraps of food instead of living off of their scraps. And he tells them how to get to Caucasus through the clashing rocks. You'll have to sail your way between them. They're very dangerous. You probably won't make it. Good luck. Here's a token of that I'll bestow on you. It's a little idol that he's wearing around his neck of Poseidon. Of course, we'll see that coming because it's a bit of foreshadowing, right? So, when they go out to the clashing rocks after sailing a ways, why this guy is in his underwear, I don't know. And they see another ship from the other side get crushed by these rocks. Nevertheless, they press on because they know they have to. Jason realizes, maybe I can call upon Poseidon to help us. So he uses the idol to get a favor from Poseidon, who holds up the clashing rocks. And this is another one of those effects that... so if you're doing... let's revert over to DM tips here. If you're doing an epic adventure and you're having the gods involved, then having little things like these magic items, like this token that lets you call upon a favor from Poseidon, certainly it's the one way they're going to get through this. For a one-shot tournament, convention game, whatever, making these things kind of obvious. And here's the thing, there's a place, this goes with that. Use it when you get the chance. Make it seem like the players are figuring something out, I suppose. But quite honestly, if you're running a campaign and here's this one magic item, it's best if it's ever going to be used for this one situation. You know, that's as railroady as it gets. That's as anti-agency as you can get. But if you give them if they're not on this mission and they don't have these clashing rocks to deal with, and you give them this Poseidon token and they can use it anytime, and somewhere down the line there's a rolled up random storm that's going to sink their ship, and they use it then of their own volition rather than risk the ship being destroyed, well, you know what? That's a great item to introduce then into an epic campaign, because you're not forcing them to use it at a certain time by pre-planning an encounter that they have no way to avoid if they're going to complete the mission they're on. And the only way to get through that encounter is to use the one thing you just gave them in the last encounter. I don't know. You know what I'm saying. Anyway, there's a great little story in regard to some of the producers being a little upset that Harryhausen didn't create a animated effect for Poseidon, but as he states, his effects and water don't really work out well together. It's not necessarily because the water could destroy some of his armatures and whatnot, which of course, they would be damaged from water. But it's because water just doesn't scale well. If you've got a 1 foot tall armature of Poseidon and this model of the cliffs and the model of the Argo going through it, and he's supposed to be this big old guy, and you bring him up out of the water, and the water's falling off of him, and it's obvious because of water being water that you're really dealing with a 1 foot tall armature and not a full-size gigantic god. It's just not going to work. So he did camera tricks, film tricks to make it work, and it worked out great. They get to the other side and they find some survivors from that shipwreck. One of them being Medea, who turns out to be important later, and we'll get to why. So they save her and a couple of her men, who they see splashing around in the water. Take her on board, and now, remember Peleus' son, Acastus, he had joined the Argonauts. Unbeknownst to Jason that it was actually Peleus' son. But he's figured it out along the way, and now it gets revealed. So they get into a fight. Because now that they're through the clashing rocks, Acastus, who was supposed to keep an eye on what was going on for his father and make sure they never get to the Golden Fleece, sees that because Medea says, well, Caucasus is half a day away. That's where I just came from. They're so close, they can taste it. And Acastus has to make sure they don't get there. So he battles Jason. He almost dies, but he jumps ship and tries to swim away. One of the crewmen, one of the Argonauts, Ophemus, I believe, jumps in after him and gets killed. And they don't know. There's a bloody rag in his hand, so they believe that he also killed Acastus. So they ain't worried about him anymore. So naive. Anywho, they continue on their way. They get her back home. She uses this plant, which she says sprung from the blood of Prometheus, which is a healing plant, rubs it on the wound that he got during the battle with Acastus, and it immediately heals up. So there's something else they should be taking back with them. They're going to keep being a warlike people, as they've proven to be over in Greece with all the city-states. Anyway, Medea heals Jason. He slips in away from the rest of the Argonauts. He says, look, we don't want to freak these people out with a bunch of us going ashore. I'll just go in. I'll get the lay of the land. I'll figure out what's going on. And so he does. He goes in. He checks out the temple. High priest of Hecata is, and notice, if you look closely, you can see Hecata seems to have 3 heads. So this is definitely not like the gods in Greece, which are all essentially in human form, or at least most of the time, although they can take other forms. This is their preferred form. Not so much for this Hecata of Caucasus. So turns out the priestess is Medea. Well, of course it is. And Medea also happens to be the daughter of King Aeetes, who is the king of the land. Jason has slipped in and sees what's going on and figures out who's who. And then he reveals himself and is invited to this feast. You've saved my daughter. You've saved the high priestess of our religion. Come have a feast with me. In fact, send for your crew. Bring them all in. So he does, and they do. and they all go there for this great feast. Again, epic, right? Everything about this. The great temple, the feast halls, everything's big, big, big. And this is another reason why Jason and the Argonauts is one of the best of the Harryhausen films, is because they definitely outdid themselves with all of these, all of the sets. All the locations are as epic as the story requires, which is fantastic. You're not seeing a lot of scenery flats up to hide other stuff, or we're not using a control room of a dam to pretend it's the inside of a spaceship like they do in 20 Million Miles to Earth. So it's come a long way since his early movies at this point. Schneer, basically his partner, the producer who put out most of his work, has really done a great job putting this one together. So big feast. However, guess what, Jason? I know you're here to steal the golden fleece, so we're going to take you and all your Argonauts captive. And how do you know that, King Aeetes? Well, I know that because the cast just swam to shore, and he's the son of another king, and so I trust him, and I know that you're here to steal the fleece and possibly kill us all, so we're just going to take you into custody. Well, he does, and they are thrown into the dungeons. And now Medea, whose life was saved by Jason, needs to make a decision, and she does. After talking to Hecata and saying, I'm on the fence, but on the one hand, he saved my life. On the other hand, if I help him escape and steal the golden fleece, I'm betraying my own people, and I won't have a home. However, the whole idea of a life debt wins out, and so she decides to go down. She has seeded all of the guards' wine with a drug to knock them all out. She comes down, steals the key, releases Jason. They go in turn, release all the rest of the Argonauts, and she leads him off, and just a couple of his men. The rest go back to the ship, and the three of them go off to four of them, five of them, go off to get the golden fleece, and they'll meet him back at the ship. Well, about this time, of course, Aeetes wakes up, starts waking up his guards. He figures out what the plan is, so he's going to go try to stop them. He knows that he's been betrayed by his own daughter. And interesting, is this all crocheted, do you think? What's going on here? It's almost a pointy hat, but they push it down so it doesn't look too much like a modern-day cult hat, if we can just use that term. But interesting. Gotta love the costumes. All epic too. These are the kinds of things you can gather up from films like this to create descriptions for hairstyles, costumes, uniforms, types of armor. Of course, we already talked about all the sets being epic. But there's so much here visually to latch onto and to borrow and port over to your RPGs. We also have a great setting for where the Golden Fleece is. It's out in the forest on an old particular tree. It hangs there, and from there it gives great prosperity and peace to the kingdom who owns it, I guess, is how it works. Anyway, Medea leads Jason and his people there. He goes to pick up the fleece, but of course, that's where he runs into the Hydra. And we talked earlier about the 7 heads and how difficult this was to portray and animate. And indeed, it's crazy cool. It's probably one of the best animations in all of Harryhausen's work. Of course, Acastus tried to get there ahead of him to steal the fleece himself, because once he had gotten Jason and them arrested, he had decided, heck, I'll just go get it for myself, for my father, and he'll think I'm even greater than just stopping Jason. But of course, he runs into the Hydra, as we discover now, and the Hydra kills him, so down he goes. Well, Jason fights the Hydra, and it's really neat. It's one of the best action sequences in the movie. One of the best. The Harpies were pretty good. This one's great. The one coming up later is great as well. Well, eventually he beats the Hydra. We won't show too much more of that because obviously you want to watch this movie, right? The Golden Fleece has healing abilities too. So when they find out Medea has been harmed, they use the Golden Fleece to restore her. And they still have not gotten away. And when Aetes realizes that his guardian Hydra is destroyed, he has his men pull teeth out of the Hydra's mouth so that he can actually, because he's apparently a spellcaster as well, can use the teeth of the Hydra to create what are called the children of the Hydra. And the children of the Hydra are the teeth spread out on the ground, and once they're spread out on the ground, from the ground spring forth the skeletons. So, again, one skeleton fighter in Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, which we were looking at earlier today. One of these 7 is that original armature. And 6 more were created. And by the way, Harryhausen's father was behind the building of many of these armatures, including these skeletons, because he was a very handy fellow. And as much as Harryhausen was great at the animation work and the vision behind it and the creating of them, the visionary visualizing of what he needed, his father did a lot of the actual mechanical work of making these armatures, which is kind of a neat side story, right? So out they go. He sends them to the attack. There is an ongoing battle, which of course incredible to watch because the animation is obviously so intricate. You've got some swords coming forward, some going back, some skeletons swinging left, some swinging right. You've got such a tightly choreographed 3 guys fighting it out up here. And I should mention, Argo had gone with them, the guy who built the ship. And he and a couple of the men were tasked with taking Medea and heading back to the ship already with the fleece, while these guys held off Aeetes, King Aeetes, and his skeletons. So this battle ensues. A couple of the guys die. Jason manages to jump from a cliff just ahead of being killed by what's left of the skeletons. And there's a great little scene. This continues, and when we switch camera angles and you see Jason plunging into the water, you see several cadavers falling into the water right behind him. So obviously they've switched from the animated skeletons to some real skeletons and just kind of chucked them off the cliff behind him. It's a little humorous. It's obviously the best way they could do it. The fact that it's close to the end of the movie at this point, you've seen so much spectacular stuff, you can't really hold it against them. But let's keep in mind, with that first skeleton in Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, which we looked at earlier today, and the 7 that were fighting it out here in Jason and the Argonauts, we really get the first D&D Undead, right? I mean, until these were imagined and were shown to be fighting, I don't think Gary or Dave or any of the people that were early on creating Dungeons and Dragons would have conceptualized skeletons as warriors and fighting in the same way, because it's so true that these must have been a heavy influence on the visualization of those creatures. And let's also say that when you get a box of skeletons from, say, GW, and have to put them together when you're deciding on the poses, can't imagine many people not thinking back to movies like this. And even if you haven't seen the movie, you've probably seen a clip from it at some point. And this is where your head goes, right? So he jumps off the cliff. He gets away. Hera and the gods look down. They see that Medea has decided to go with them because she no longer has a homeland, having betrayed her father and her country by giving up the fleece and letting Jason sail away with it. But this is where we get that little exchange between Hera and Zeus, where he says, well, let them have their fun for now. There are more adventures in store for Jason. And that was the little exchange that made me always think, well, someday there'll be another Jason movie, right? Now, we never did get to see it, and I don't know if they, like I said earlier, were just leaving the door open, or if they actually had anything on the drawing board that they had in mind. But they got involved with other projects. Because after Jason and the Argonauts in 63, they went on to 66 with 1 million BC, which we saw yesterday in the Valley of GWANGI in 69. And it wasn't until 73 that they get back to a sword and sandal feature with the Golden Voyage of Sinbad, which we'll take a look at tomorrow at 9:30. And that gets followed with Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger in 77, which we'll look at tomorrow at 5:30. Second to last, penultimate movie, because the last one, Clash of the Titans in 81, we'll take a look at it Monday. So at this point, starting tomorrow, we'll be working our way through his last 3 films in succession chronologically. Great, take a lot from this. You got to see this movie. You've got to enjoy the special effects. You've got to enjoy the big epic scenery. You've got to see it for yourself. So fantastic. There's so much that's going to port over to your games. You'll just be amazed. Well, I want to thank anybody who's managed to pop in, following the channel, pop into the stream chat. I also want to say, anybody who's catching up with this on YouTube, thank you very much. Be sure to subscribe. Give us a little thumbs up. Maybe make a comment. Give us your feedback. We appreciate it. As I said before, tomorrow we are looking at, well, don't forget Monday is Harryhausen Day. His centennial would have been his 100th birthday. He passed away at 92 in 2013, but we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of his date of birth, June 29th, 1920. So that's why we're doing it. We looked on Thursday at 20 million miles to Earth, a mysterious island. Yesterday, 1 million years BC in the Valley of GWANGI. Today we looked at 7th Voyage of Sinbad, Jason and the Argonauts. And tomorrow, Golden Voyage of Sinbad, Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. Monday, Clash of the Titans will be the last one we'll look at. Again, thank you everybody for checking in with us. Hope you enjoy this series. We'll get back to it tomorrow, 9:30 a.m. Central Time from beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Happy gaming.